Hello, my name is Alyssa Taylor, and I did my unit on place value, specifically for second grade students. I really think that place value is something that can get overlooked when our students are learning about math, especially when it comes to more complex numbers leading into the thousands. Um, the objectives that I had covered different concepts related to place value that I thought would be important to recognize. My standards are listed right here. I tried to stick with the basics related to place value because I feel like the basics and the foundation need to be set for our students before we just throw them into completing assignments and doing work just related to it. So most of the beginning of the standards is related to the 3-digit numbers and the representation of each of the hundreds, tens, and ones placed in the numbers. And I also think it's important to explain to our students that if they have 10 ones, that's equal to 110. So teaching them both ways so that they can understand concepts, especially when it comes to adding more complex numbers using a 10 frame. Um, so in this standard, they have to count within 1,000, read and write numbers using base 10 numerals, like I just said, understanding that 10 ones is 110 as well. And comparing the numbers using greater than, less than, or equal to symbols. I included the standards for mathematical practice because I feel like those were important and they were things that I didn't think were necessarily touched on enough. I feel like they're things we all know, but we don't necessarily share with our students and explain what they mean, especially like words like precision that younger students may not understand, or quantitatively, that we can explain better to them so they know what we're looking for and they know what to expect or what we expect from them. My objectives are listed right here. My objectives were all fairly related to the same standards because my lessons were geared more towards being interactive with my students using number talks and just letting them explore and learn while trying to understand, which may not have been the best approach, but I think it works well with students, especially using manipulatives. So my objectives are, by the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify numbers in the hundreds, tens, and ones place by creating base 10 Unifix cube counters. Students will be able to develop a deeper understanding of place value through this exercise. The next objective had to do with art. It was an art lesson where students were using different sized pieces of fruit to represent different place values. So if the fruit was bigger, it represented hundreds, and if it was smaller, it may represent a ones. In the next lesson, I planned on reading a story, so students need to listen to that story, and will then write a short narrative about the book in relation to place value, because inside this book it talks about different amounts and what the different amounts really represent and how we can create ratios related to place value while looking at the book. The last lesson was using or incorporating a number line. I remember when I was in elementary school, we didn't use a number line until I was in algebra and geometry. So I think providing students with a number line that they can use for more challenging problems can just help nip in the bud any problems that they may run into before going on to bigger numbers. I included my engagement strategies. I feel like these are really important, especially again with younger students, because they have a shorter attention span and they tend to drift off and not always listen to what's being said. I mentioned in here how important the use of manipulatives are, especially with younger students, because it gives them something to do with their hands. With that being said, in each of my lessons where I used manipulatives, I specified that time was given separate from the lesson for students to interact with each other using the manipulatives so that when the lesson started, they weren't distracted by what's in front of them. For the design process, I reflect now back on what I did and wish that I had done, backwards planning, especially with the assessment design. I thought of basic lessons because this is a starting point for a lot of students. So I thought of things I could implement for my students to understand the concepts better, and I considered the importance of using manipulatives. I went to a training a week before this assignment was due, and it was all about math assessment and preparing our students for learning about math concepts that are more challenging. And I derived some of my lessons, especially lesson one, from that example during the assessment because I saw how well the students I was assessing responded to that. A success and challenge during this mini unit. A challenge I experienced was creating the assessment. I'm not that familiar with using Google Forms, and through trial and error, I was able to see that it's user friendly, but it took me a little while before I got comfortable enough to create my own questions, especially because the first two are like in templates, so they're more straightforward. A success was with my lessons. As I mentioned, I went to a training the week before this assignment, and from that I was able to see where some second grade students were lacking, especially in relation to place value, which made me even more eager to do this assignment and to focus on second grade and place value.